Hey, I want to welcome everybody to the Sacramental Charismatic podcast, and I am with my friend and co-host Wes McLaughlin. My name is Luke Garrity. Wes, how are you this afternoon?
Really good, man. Do you think people are going
to sound really good?
Really good. Do you think people are going to catch on that we are in our literal same clothes as the?
This is my podcasting shirt.
3 episodes.
Yeah. This whole cranking out 85 episodes in one day is the move. Definitely.
It is.
We should apologize. I should apologize to the listeners who are always texting me, when you guys going to put another one out? And you actually have people that ask you as well. And I'm like, I'm on the river right now, so I can't really answer that question. You were just telling me that you're going to go to South Africa when are you going?
We're going beginning of June for a whole month.
Yeah, this June, as in like next in a month.
As in next month, yeah.
Yeah, and I was remarking about how you're probably going to eat some of that Beelzebub South African jerky.
Oh, it was a
Satan,
sore point in my life when I managed to get some biltong. It's called biltong.
Beelzebub.
Biltong for Luke, and I was like, couldn't wait for them to taste it because I was like, this is so much better than beef jerky, and he just crapped on it for still to this day, and I don't understand it because I've never had that reaction before from anyone else who's tasted.
I don't know if you remember this, but everybody who tried it was like, ew.
It must be a rib. It must be a rib.
You brought, because we have real stuff here. You brought 2 things back from South Africa. One of them was terrible satanic Beelzebub jerky, and the other one was South African wine. You are totally encouraged to bring back South African wine.
South African wine is really good.
We will.
That's really good stuff. Yeah.
Enjoy that. So we're jumping into part 2 of what is a healthy church. We had part 1 where we laid out some of the different aspects of a healthy church. We're borrowing from 10 things that Wimber had kind of indicated were values. He actually at one time said these are things that should be in every vineyard church. So those were churches that were connected to Wimber. There's other churches out there, other networks that would say that they have been influenced by Wimber. And so he had 10 things really quickly. The Bible taught as the word of God. 2, ministry to the poor, orphans, widows. 3, evangelism tied to social concerns. Number 4, healing the sick and casting out demons. We talked about that quite a bit the last episode. Commitment to 5 is commitment to small groups. 6, equipping the saints in things such as serving, giving, doctrine, family, finances. We talked about that a fair amount. Number 7, interaction with other pastors and churches. So there's relationship there. Number 8, worship that reflects the values God has given us, such as intimacy, being natural, etc. You and I dived into that and suggested that there should be emphasis on baptism and the Eucharist there. 9, the exercise of spiritual gifts, touched on that. 10, commitment to missions. And so we're coming at that from the perspective of you and I have been involved in a number of conversations. I've done recently an interview with somebody who was spiritually abused by Alan Scott at the Dwelling Place in Anaheim. And so we figured it would be very helpful to articulate what if there's this unhealthy church community amongst other unhealthy, abusive, controlling, manipulative communities that are out there, unhealthy churches that are actually harming the work of the kingdom. What would it be? What would it look like for a church to be healthy? And so where you want to jump in today?
Well, I think we sort of spoke about a few things, but maybe a good one to start off on is ministry to the poor, orphans, widows. I think that would be a solid place to start because that was always, I know there's like John Wimber and Wimberisms, but that was something that was very important to him early on in his journey was how he just felt like if this wasn't central to his church in the ministry to the poor, orphans, and widows, then he didn't want to be a part of it. So,
Yeah.
um,
He famously said, if you're not ministering to the poor, don't put the vineyard name on it.
oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. So let's talk about that. What's that look like?
mhm.
So I'm in California, and I mean, gosh, this, there's definitely a crisis of unhomed, dehomed, there's all these
Unhoused.
unhoused. Yeah, there's all these terms
Mm, yeah.
that are used now. But yeah, there's a lot of homeless folks
Hmm.
in California. It's everywhere. I've heard from certain people that near you up in Portland, Oregon, there's a fair amount of people who are
Yep.
in kind of a similar situation, and uh, maybe we could talk a bit about how what that looks like, because I think
Hmm.
that's probably one of the most challenging ministries to be involved in,
Hmm.
because it seems like that community is not monolithic. There's a lot of different causations. There's mental health crisis relation issues there. There's drug addiction or addictions in general that are connected to it. There's I've talked to people who are like, no, I don't want to. I would like
Hmm.
to live under a bridge in a tent. Then there's people who also have experienced an economic crisis and end up living, on the streets, so to speak,
Hmm.
or in a tent due to some type of an economic thing. So there's a real, it's very. On one hand, I want to say it's not complicated. On the other hand, I do want to say it is complicated to know what's
Hmm.
the best way to reach each those people there. So take it away, fix it, show us how to do it. What's the answer? As a leading psychologist.
Yeah. Okay. I just whip it up real quick.
Yeah.
Here's the solution.
What's the 5-step plan?
Okay, so before we get very practical, well, to start practically, I mean, it's not practical for every single church to start a food bank. Like, not every single church is called to start a food bank. Let's just say that. And maybe that's actually not what's needed. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not the only way to start a ministry for the poor. It's one way for sure, but
Mm-hmm.
it might not be needed in your community. If you're right next to a food bank, maybe that's not what's needed. So I think maybe the first step is to not just think of it as a very narrow way. There's so many different ways in which to engage in this ministry. I do think that it's not like, just to echo Wimber's thing, like this is fundamental to what caused the church to explode in the early centuries, was this very commitment. Because if you think about it, back then when Jesus says something like this, it might for us seem like, oh, that's not a big deal, but back then that was a massive deal, to associate widows and orphans as human, even as people
Mm-hmm.
deserving of care, would have been massive. And then people acting on it. The first hospital was started by Saint Basil, an early church father, and he literally was just trying to provide food. There was a huge famine in the area, and so he was literally just trying to get food for people. And he would literally go to rich people and say, "You need to give us money, pretty much. Like,
Mm-hmm.
listen, you need to fund this." Like, he was unapologetic about preaching to rich people about doing this. So I think this is not some small thing. This is like part of church history to
Mm-hmm.
what's caused it. So um, my first thing would be like, if you're not doing anything right now as a church, like, you should stop. Like, not everything, but just be like, hey, this needs to be one of our
Mm-hmm.
central things to who we are, and our mission, because it's part of our history as the Church of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and just
Um,
really quickly, the patient ferment of the church, patient ferment of the
yes,
early church, or whatever,
yeah,
in that
yeah.
book, and numerous other church histories. have, I think, I don't think this is debated amongst any patristic scholars or ecclesiology focused folks about church history. Um, the church, the message of the gospel, the kingdom, Jesus spread very rapidly in the first couple hundred years of the church because of hospitality. It was the
Mm-hmm.
radical hospitality of the early Christians to serve the poor, to remember the poor, to
Mm-hmm.
work toward better treatment of people who had been impacted by the constraints of the ancient brutal world of the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like you're saying, it's not like this is a new a new thing, that the church has to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So keep going.
Well, actually, I was going to say, okay, so that's taking it like that, and then if you're like at that step where you're like, okay, well, what is this going to look like for our church? That's when there's so many different things that you could do. I have been deeply impacted by a book called The Nazarene Manifesto by a UK theologian called Samuel Wells. You may have heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
He he has a really good that book. He argues that the most important book in the Bible is the word with, and he contends that our whole ethics should be defined by this word. And so, one way to look at a ministry for the poor um, is to not just be a transactional ministry where you're only all about giving something away. Yeah, that's included, or whatever it is, but it's also a way of engaging people in relationship and
Mm.
learning to journey with people where they're at in that place, and not being saviors, but actually willing to um uh get into that journey with them. So highly recommend that book, but just to provide like a framework for maybe like how to think through and pray through this process of doing this ministry. um yeah, what are your thoughts? And um
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't. I think this is a really. I so I don't know. um, just I was very much influenced by just the concerns or challenges of a book called When Helping Hurts. You might have heard of
Hmm.
that book.
Hmm.
And just about how not only short-term missions, but some of the things that we do in our communities can actually have long-term harm.
Hmm.
And then it is interesting because going back to the various different ways that people can be where they're at, from their own, it's the consequences of decisions that they've made. And so that
Hmm.
doesn't mean we stop, because I think the problem is that people will say, well, that's their decision, they made that decision, so
Hmm.
therefore I'm like, does that mean we don't help? Because there's
Yeah.
everybody who comes to church is facing the consequences of sin, bad decisions, brokenness, messiness, etc. We do our best to try to help everybody.
Hmm.
But just really thinking through the most, because it's in our community, there's so many different resources. I actually had a person who was part of the homeless community once tell me that he was just saying, he's like, yeah, the one reason why I stay here and I stay in the situation I'm in is because there's just so many different resources in this county. He's like, I'm good. He had a phone because it was provided for him.
Hmm.
He had money, I think once or twice a month, deposited in onto a card. He had health, care, which I know is not true for everybody. But my point being is that he just had a lot of. It was an interesting thing because I was like, oh, well, that's interesting, and he was saying that. So that's been challenging in our community, is identifying, okay, where are the needs that we can
Hmm.
either, because I think there's two things as a church, who can we partner with.
Hmm.
We don't have to have our own thing, because that's a mistake I think a lot of churches make, is it's
Yeah.
like we got to have our own thing and have control.
Yeah.
um, somewhat, and to a certain extent, I understand sometimes that concern, but there was that, and then so find who can we partner with, and then where are the needs, because we have a fair amount of people coming to our church, our church on Sundays who are part of that community, and I think just from a foundation, we've really tried to create a church community where we really mean come as you are. We really mean that. And people will be welcomed and loved, and then no matter what their background is, but then also too trying to encourage and empower individuals to take risks and follow the Spirit's leading. And so we've had, I can think of a lot of people who have randomly tried to help individuals who they connect with and they meet, which I think is a good thing. But that still doesn't necessarily mean that we have like a really articulated way of engaging that currently. I think we've mostly just worked with local community organizations. Like one I'm on the board for a domestic violence organization, and there's a significant amount of focus in that organization that we've partnered with them on hosting things and doing things together as a church that works amongst the homeless community, because a lot of domestic violence happens in that community, which is something I don't hear a lot about that at all. But women and children in the homeless communities and encampments oftentimes are the victims of extreme sexual abuse and also trafficking and indentured slave. There's just a lot of really bad stuff that happens. Physical abuse, mental abuse, etc. So so it's for me, I feel like we're still I think we're open to where the Spirit might lead us. And I'm not, but we're trying to very much not use that as an excuse to not do anything. Because I feel like sometimes it's like, well, we're just going to wait for the Holy Spirit, and then 25 years goes by. So we've done some love. We recently, one of the ways we did an outreach where we did this Love Red Bluff campaign thing where we laundry amongst the homeless. There are some homeless folks who do go to the laundromats, we found out, which it was like, oh, that I hadn't even thought about that. You're living in a van or in a tent and you need to do laundry. Where would you do that at? So so we one Saturday morning we sent out 3 different teams to the 3 different laundromats and just paid for everybody's laundry. And there was one lady in particular who shared with the group that we had there just how she has nowhere else to do her laundry, and she's living in a tent right now, and she was just super grateful that she was able to save like 20, because laundry is actually really expensive. I didn't realize how expensive it was. So that was one way, but it is, I don't know. I feel like there's no way I could do anything other than say we could always do better. That's honestly I'm at.
I think that is always something that churches are going to have, though. I don't think any church is going to be like, we've done it all, there's nothing more we can do type deal. And I think that's a healthy response. And I think I love that example that you gave, because the first thing people will probably think about is like, oh, we need to start a program. Or like, oh, we should start this ministry. And what they mean by that is like, oh, we need to do this specific thing. And then that will legitimize what we're doing, when that's not the case at all. If it's something that you're like talking about and wanting to do, like there's a huge advantage to not having an official program where you can have the flexibility, and in a way then you are just more flexible to meeting current needs, like the laundromat. That you're like, okay, this is something that's a real need right now and we can do something about it. So I at the end of the day, it's like we're just trying our best to follow Jesus's call for us to what we're supposed to be doing. And we're not trying to make ourselves look good in the process. Like, it's not about that. It's not about like us going, okay, we're doing this and we're ticking this box, and therefore like we're off the hook. Um, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, no, I think that's very much a yeah, it's like there's just these tensions that um it's like because I think that there are some I mean there's ways that you can help that like again they actually harm people or have
Mhm.
long-term negative impact, you know. I mean, I think enough research has been done on that. You know, and then there's a whole lot of other various causations and you know connecting challenges to that world as well. And you know, caring for people
Mhm.
means caring for everybody, or you know,
Mhm.
that's like it's not like I want to you know not care for non homeless people or put
Yeah.
them in harms because we've had some things we've had to actually like security deal with some people that were intent on harming other people through their trauma, through their grief. I mean, there's always people always have reasons for
Yeah.
it, but it's like I'm not going to
Yeah.
ever. I will go on record to say I will never ever put children or people in our church community in a space where they could also be, you know, victims.
Mm.
We try to
Mhm.
protect people from being victimized. So it's a challenge because obviously not everybody, but then the other side of it is not the other thing that happens a lot of times is all homeless people are X, Y, Z. And it's like, no, that's not
Mm.
true at all. There's numerous folks who are connected to you know poverty and economic crisis and stuff that just they
Yeah.
need help and they need to be cared for. So yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think you're right though that churches need to have some focus on that, you know, and discipleship to not assume that people. It's very interesting how the Bible. It's this like folk theology that you know that cleanliness is next to godliness, or this idea of people somehow just need to pull their bootstraps up and just you know like you know it's easy, just start working harder.
Yeah.
That is true for some people. Some
Yeah.
people need to go out and get a job
Yeah.
110%, but that's
Yeah.
not true for everybody. You know, I
Yeah.
was helping somebody who wanted to get a job, could not, didn't have access to a computer to fill
Yeah.
out a resume, didn't have a space to take showers, didn't have a
Yeah.
vehicle to drive to places. And
Yeah.
so we put him, there's an organization that actually has computers that will help you create a resume. There was somebody in our church said, hey, come over here and take a shower. We got them a bike so they could ride their
Mhm.
bike around, you know, because they didn't have a license. And so there was some forward progress in that too, but it wasn't as simple as just go out and get a job. I just find that answer to be completely missing the
Just
point.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you touch on is like we live in a very different culture to obviously when the scripture was written
Mm-hmm.
and to what the early church was involved in. It's like we just like there were no nonprofits back then looking
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, that like a lot of the nonprofits now really mimic what the church was doing back in the early days.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? It's like to provide clothing, to provide food, to provide housing. There's so many organizations that are carrying out that work in a way, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like I think there's not this need to like compete with them as the church. It's not like the church has this like stronghold on like, oh, we're the only ones that can truly meet the need of people in these places, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah. 100%.
Um, and so partnering with those organizations, even if you don't agree with everything, like that doesn't mean that you're like stamping your approval, but you are saying like, hey, we have a unified mission in this that we can partner
Totally.
with you.
Mm-hmm.
And in like that's amazing. You know, that's a great thing. And so there what you're doing is you're developing relationships with the community, with
Mm-hmm.
other organizations in the community, and you're
Well, those
collaborating
organizations
with
start to see those organizations see value though in the church. Then they actually like,
yeah,
okay, you guys are kind of putting your money where your mouth is because you talk a lot about Jesus and grace and the kingdom and ministry and serving people and blah blah blah. But now you're actually engaged in it, and so we have people that come to our church now that the reason why they did is because of our outreaches during, we've had these fire, I think you were probably here when it happened. There was these huge fires that, unhomed a ton of people. And so we were doing feeding, we were hosting, we had people staying at our church. We had, even in this room, there was cots in this office at one time where people were
Yeah, I
sleeping in
remember
it,
that.
because their houses had sadly burned down. And there were people that came, weren't a part of our church, came, saw, served, and then we're like, wow, if churches do this, I want to be a part of that. And then they came to faith and got plugged in. So yeah, I mean, I think we underestimate, because we've talked about that in our leadership, where it's like, yeah, we partner with organizations where they don't hold the same biblical values or the same ideas of who Jesus is. And we respectfully disagree, or, we have these conversations in a respectful way, but we don't need to agree on all those things, because we can work together to alleviate a certain challenge or a certain, try to minimize the impact of brokenness in our community. But yeah, I mean, California, it just feels like there is it is a nightmare, because there's you have the state, the governmental, the bureaucracy, the social services, everything is oftentimes working against each other, and then working against the actual benefits, long-term benefits of people. That's what I'm
Totally.
observing. So it's like, well, I don't even know where to begin sometimes.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. Then there's laws preventing you from doing some stuff like helping. So you're
Yep.
navigating all of that,
Yeah.
and it does seem a lot more complicated
Yeah.
in so many different ways. But yeah,
Uh,
I mean, yeah.
let me so there's just a recommendation to folks. So if you're not sure, if you're not sure how to actually I don't know, get involved in serving people who need help, and who are experiencing the impact of economics or poverty. One book that's been really helpful for us, just to find some practical thing, just to start, is a book by Steve Sjogren, called 101 Ways to Reach Your Community. And it's a super old school. You have to see the cover. I think it was written in 1990 something. I don't even know. It says 2014. That's a reprint for sure. But that book has got just dozens and dozens and dozens of practical ways to go out and just serve people in parks, in the community, and that's a great place to start. And there might be a group of people who kind of develop out of that become a team that then eventually discern the next step, and maybe your church community partners with another organization or starts some type of a ministry that's focused. So I think there is definitely a way for churches to move forward. But I think this topic actually kind of would really naturally connect to another aspect or identifying marker of a healthy church, and that has to do with mission. Because I think with mission, oftentimes we think through the lens of going to Africa, going to Asia, going to but mission is something that the church should be totally focused on, in both its local, translocal, and global perspective. And I'm thinking of Acts 1:8, right? You will wait; the Holy Spirit will come upon you, receive power, and you will be my witnesses. This is Jesus speaking to the disciples. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Right. So you see this local, translocal, global. So I think when you think of serving the poor or serving people who are and use poverty, not just financial, but across the spectrum, when you tie that to mission, I think that's really a helpful way to out it is this is just an aspect of us carrying out our mission. So I've been a long advocate for, I super dislike catchy slogans for churches. I just find it so annoying, where it's like these really cool sentences our mission is, or we exist to, and it's a really cool thing. I found Christopher Wright's books on the mission of God and the mission of the church to be so compelling biblically, is that the church's mission should be God's mission. I just don't see any other way around it. Like we should like get back to what is God's mission. And he makes a great case for the idea that God is eager to be known, and and so the mission of the church should be God's mission of helping know God and to help other people know God. And the way that we can make people known, or make people become aware of God, is through these activities of the kingdom. And so that's why that's why I always want to say mission is, like, I think all these activities of the kingdom, whether it's casting out the sick, or casting out the demons, casting out demons, healing the sick, global missions, food banks, reaching, like kids, just whatever it is, serving people who are retired and who live in retirement homes, who don't have visitors and are isolated and lonely. Hospital visitations, the work that you're doing as a chaplain is, I think, a missiological thing. So, for me, if we view all these activities of the kingdom, like fighting for justice and pursuing, justice in society, if we view all those as different aspects of mission, I think it's actually a healthier framework rather than just adding another ministry for the sake of adding a ministry. No, these things outflow from our commitment to, for God to be known. So that's, so I think the mission thing is probably very central. That's why we're talking about, these are the things, right? These are the values. What are your thoughts about mission? You've read a lot on that topic.
I think linking it back to your vision and just understanding it as central and not like an added thing just to whatever it is really important. And the fact that you're embracing this outward looking framework, it's really easy for churches to slip into like being inward. And what I mean by inward is, just by like completely focusing on their own little community and not being aware at all relationships outside the community, how they're impacting their community, how they're partnering with other people in their community. All of that stuff is really central. And the fact that you want to reach people outside of your community, what
did Wimber said something like, if your church didn't exist, or if it no longer existed, would anybody notice? That was one of the ways he articulated it. Yeah, and I think I've heard I can't remember exactly. This has been said by so many different people, but it's like the church is the only organization in the world that was created specifically for the benefit of its non-members. Yeah. Right. So like most churches or most organizations are like, we're a club that benefits ourselves and we are looking for people who can be a part of our club. Whereas the church actually is supposed to be oriented in an outward focused way, where it's like, we gather, we worship, we want to honor God, glorify God. That's our, primary focus for us. But we also exist to help other people come to know God and other people to experience God's grace and mercy, and to serve them and to love them and to communicate God's mercy and forgiveness and grace, and then to serve them by actually feeding them or providing hope, or whatever it looks like. It's like those are two. That's a really big part of God's mission. And so when we are having just Holy Spirit Club meetings where we're patting each other on the back, I think we completely missed the point.
And you can pray all you want for your city, but if you're not impacting, if you're not like in the streets, so to say, like another Wimberism, then like what's the point? So
do you know that story about do you know the story about Wimber, where I think he was in New York? This is gonna be a fuzzy memory, but the story, it might be in Doing Church, but anyway, the story goes, he was in New York and he was in a taxi and he was driving, and the taxi cab driver was like, not a churchy person, a lot of cuss words, and saw a church. Well, he saw a van, and I think the van like cut him off or something, and he started like cursing that van, and he started cussing the taxi driver, and then Wimber was like, "Hey, do you?" Because he recognized it, and it was like a Korean church. He's like, "Hey, do you know that van's it's a Korean church van?" And the guy then just unloaded on the church. He's like, "Oh, those Christians, da 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 da." And Wimber just kind of sat there.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it, he got out, and he was gonna, like, he leaned in to pay the guy, and the guy grabbed the $20 bill, and then Wimber held on to it, and he just said, "Hey, if you were going to go to a church, like, what kind of church would you go to?" And this taxi cab driver was like, "Well, I'd go to a church that served the poor, helped people, loved people, welcomed people." He had this big long list of things. I can't remember all the attributes. And then he grabbed the $20 bill and sped off. And then Wimber said, "Man, even the world knows what the church is supposed to do." Mm-hmm. And it was like it was a pretty formative experience for him, because I think then he spent, the rest of his life basically. That's why he even articulated these values, for us in our neck of the woods who have been influenced by Wimber, to like not don't just meet on Sundays. Mm-hmm. And that's what's ironic. Like, Wimber was the music dude, right? Like the Calvary Chapel and the Vineyard were the folks who brought the modern. They really helped highlight worship as a experiential, intimate experience where you're singing songs to God, not just singing songs about God. And there were those albums sold, millions of dollars of album sales, and yet that wasn't the thing. It's like that was a thing, but there was more to it, and the church had a purpose. And so mission is like, crucial for the church. I think, it has to be central for us.
Has to be central. Yeah.
So why didn't you start with that as the number one thing you talked about? I'm just kind of curious. Why were you you picked like some
I did. What are you talking about?
Oh, you did? Okay.
I was just waiting for you to get there. That's all.
You're just being a psychologist.
Yeah. Oh man, but and when you have that, then you can start looking at your community. Like, what does your community have? What does your community have to offer? Like, you guys, if you have a building, that could be an incredible way of offering your community something. How can your building be a thing for your community?
The building being on mission with God's mission,
exactly,
for the purpose of glorifying God and serving people. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's good.
Like, if you don't have a building, but you have other things, you have a dedicated group of people that are able to go out on a weekend somewhere, volunteer, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, it does, like, it can be big, it can be small, it can be whatever. Any church can go and help out people in a laundromat and pay for their laundromat. You know what I mean? Like, totally. Take your tithes and offerings.
Yeah. Another thing too, I was a friend of mine just reminded me of this the other day. I was driving to the hospital, and we were driving back, and he's like, we were driving past this road, and he's like, "Hey, you remember when we moved there was like a single mom that apparently we helped her move, from one place to another place?" And I was like, "No, I don't remember that at all." And then I was thinking about it, and I was like, and it's because I think this has been true of every church that I've been a part of, is that one of the most like consistent things that we've done as churches is we function as moving companies that don't charge people, where people will always be like, "Hey, I need some help move." You and I have moved.
We did that. We literally did that.
Someday we'll tell that story. Yeah, totally. But remember how one of them ended up coming to our church.
Yeah.
So it was just totally interesting. Yeah. They just like, "Hey, we need some help moving. Can you guys do it?" Free labor. Apparently people, but it ended up being, over the last 25 years of ministry involvement in church leadership. I honestly think that I have probably been involved in packing and moving people either out of our community because they're moving to another state. I've even gone on some travel to other states, or moving into the community, or just moving across town, probably a couple hundred times, like legitimately, gather up a group of people and we go and pack things up. And so, why have we done that? I don't think we've actually ever, I think that is, I think that probably is our practices are better than our theology sometimes, and that practice was flowing out of what we've learned from Jesus and Scripture, But it was like, because I was thinking about the other day, I was like, yeah, why do we do that? Because I mean, I hate moving. I can't even communicate. Like, I hate it. I hate everything about it. Just because I'm always like, man, it's just so much work to pack, But at the same time, too, it's also huge. Like, when we've moved, having people help us is like such a huge. We all hate it together. We all hate it together, but we're doing it together, and so it's so I guess it's like, oh, that's interesting how that connects to the mission of God a bit.
Totally, and we're probably going to end in a bit, but to also just give like a quick plug too, as like someone who worked in as a hospice chaplain, is the amount of lonely people in old care facilities is staggering, and just like they've been deserted by families and they don't know anyone. They've probably 50% of them have dementia or early signs of it, and I almost relate them to the lepers of our society, that we just cast them out. Like, we don't know what to do with people with dementia and Alzheimer's, and they have behavioral issues, all of that, and then we literally don't know what to do. And then the staff members are so burnt out, they don't get paid enough, all of this. And those facilities are just, there's 100% one near your church, wherever you are.
Yeah, Red Bluff's got what, 8, 9?
Yeah,
everywhere.
Like, and they very rarely turn away people who are willing to come and like play games with folks. Bible studies, like, oh my gosh, I led a Bible study once a week.
They love it. Yeah,
they were like, half of them weren't even Christian. They just wanted to be part of whatever was going on. It's like a great theological place. So anyways, that I just did want to say, like, you could go to any one of those in your community, and that is like,
so they generally jump at the opportunity to have you come on a regular
basis.
It's like, and it's a good rhythm. There's a couple in our church community, they own a home, and prior to COVID, I was going over, and I need to revisit that, but I would go there on Wednesdays, and oftentimes I brought our youngest son with us too, because he was like, when we first started doing it, he's probably 3 years old. So it was cool because he was being shaped and formed for a value of mission. That was one thing that was neat. He saw the why serving was important, and then on top of that, all of those grandparents loved having some kid. They're like, yeah, Luke, shut up. Oh, hey, little kid, you're so cute. And then, and so we'd have these Bible studies, and it was like, it was so great. I mean, I would show up with tattoos and totally like, wearing a hat back there, but they totally, I'm sure they were all judging me and everything. Not all of them, but I know one of them did. She's like, I don't really like that stuff, but I like you. It was just like, oh, thank you. But why? Because they were just lonely and wanted to connect with people. So so let's wrap up with that. We've kind of narrowed a number of the characteristics, qualities, values that can help your church become a bit more healthy. If you're not doing these things, you can add them. If you're already doing them, keep at it. It's good. And so you can check out episode 1, and we would love to encourage you to leave a review. That we need to say that more. It's really helping our podcast grow, reach more people. Leave comments below. Wes is anxious. Subscribe. Substack, go to our Substack as well. We're going to be putting out more and more writings. We're kind of re-gearing up now. Thanks for listening. And Wes, have a great day. Maybe we'll do another podcast in completely different clothing or our podcast clothing. All right. Peace out.
All right. Bye.